Can I get the moderators from each strategy session to show up and report to the stage now? So I'm looking for Elizabeth, who's here. Who else? Jake? Is Jake here?
We have to come early, and they have to report on their projects. Yeah, we forget.
Oh, good on you.
All right, so we're going to begin the report out before officially closing the day and segueing into social activity. And I think we're going to go just in the order of small, medium, XL that was set up in terms of the scenario spectrum. And so I'm going to turn over to Marilee to kind of queue up the report out from track 1. And we'll keep moving from there. And this may or may not take all the time. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, so we were small. I'm wearing my small t-shirt today, which is my Februarian t-shirt, so that's appropriate. We talked about things from 3 different perspectives. Perspective of readers and researchers of Wikipedia, perspectives of Wikidata and Wikipedia editors who would be in our future, and bots.
And bot maintainers.
Bots and bot maintainers. And we discussed our hopes and fears, had a number of different scenarios, and had 3 candidate projects that we wanted to put forth for your consideration. We have people from our group who will come up one by one and share those with you. So come up and talk. We outsource the problem rather than supporting ourselves.
Hey everyone. Yeah, we didn't prepare any slides for this. If you went through the same gauntlet we did, you just didn't have the time. But so let's see. My little group was in charge of sort of envisioning some solutions and futures for software and software maintainers adjacent to Wikidata. And it was a long discussion. But before we even got into that, I think probably the most interesting question that I asked of the group was how many people in our room felt that the small solution was really just a stepping stone to the second and third, and it was actually sort of gradiated. But actually, interestingly, like pretty much everyone agreed that it was either on the path or harder than some of the other options, because the biggest issue is getting community buy-in, right? Like, at least the way we read it, the second sort of size, the medium scenario, was not necessarily like involving as much or buy-in from Wikipedia. Just didn't necessarily require it. But we had to find some way of doing that. So let's see, getting into sort of our proposed solution for this, what we came up with was, well, I mean, just a very naive approach to this sort of thing, since we have the time to discuss it, it seems, is just like, you would make a list of all references in Wikipedia, right? The ones that aren't already Wikidata items, right? You'd find some way to parse them out, find an identifier, or use some parser-rated parser, and then you would convert them into structured items and replace the reference on Wikipedia. It's pretty easy, right? Why does it take so many? This is like the 3rd Wikicite. I don't know why someone didn't come up with this already. Anyways, so that's a very naive solution. And there's so many like problems along the way. So we figured like pretty much what our solution for this is going to be is to do a very sized down version of this. Start by identifying one wiki project, 2,000 items or less, right? That is sort of like kind of thought forward, template forward, maybe structured data forward, and kind of willing to be early adopters for a miniature version of this plan, right? We don't want to be like, Wikidata, like citation advocates going in and arguing on behalf of replacing like a bunch of unassociated articles, citations, just because we happen to have just built support for those citations in Wikidata. So instead, we try to find a little like wiki project that we know would actually be amenable to this, and have them do the argumentation that this is their experiment, and you can find your own telescopes, or whatever. So, anyways, so it's more an idea around community engineering, so yeah, what we're going to start with first is kind of like just list maintenance tools, quality maintenance tools that actually let us track, so, to some degree, sort of like the edits to Wikidata items and maybe associated Wikipedia articles. And there's a pretty neat feature, I don't know if you saw it, but there's like related changes that I discussed with Daniel, and it's like, maybe that could actually be something that we can build off of if we're going to do something in just one day. So if you're interested in building, those quality maintenance tools, list maintenance tools, or even like going further and building like a parser for unstructured citations, then talk to one of us. Anyways, do we do questions for this sort of thing, or?
Let's have you guys all report out.
That sounds good. That sounds good. All right. Without further ado, Miriam. Oh, okay. I should hear your voice. Let's just see your face. Here you go.
Okay. So another of the baby steps that we identified towards making Wikicite a structured repository of all citations in Wikimedia project is to identify and index citations without identifiers. So basically, we want to first produce a list of all citations in Wikipedia. And then find out the ones that are without identifiers, so that we can work on that part and trying to come up with ways and data models to index them, quantify how much of these are spread into different wiki projects, and actually in the context of research projects, such as, for example, the one that I showed yesterday, actually also understand how much readers care about citations of different types. I don't have many other things to say, so I think I'll pass to you.
So the third data step we came up with was a dashboard for tracking progress of integrating Wikicite with the project. There was a while ago a big project to change commons to use structured information instead of plain text licenses, which have a tracking tool called Mr. Metadata. We can look at it on GoServer, which I think is the gold standard for this kind of thing. And we'd like to have a similar tool that lists all the projects. You can look at which projects have, for example, site read integration, which projects have a site queue template, which projects have queue numbers integrated in the citation templates, and you can look at where each project is in terms of converting references to have queue numbers, but fractions numbers already, that kind of thing, and the dashboard can be shared with editors, and they can easily look up how to send instructions using it.
Yeah, there is time. There's time for a brief Q&A about this track and what you just heard or what you didn't hear and want to hear more about. So, anyone?
Yeah, we were instructed to be a little bit solution heavy. So if you're curious about any of the other discussion about like just sort of hopes, fears, those sorts of fun things, feel free to ask.
All of our hopes and fears are already
Yes, painstakingly transcribed. Lots of transcription done by the moderators. Big thank you to them for that.
Fantastic.
Probably the best moderators of all three groups, I'm just saying. Dario? Oh, you want mic here?
Thank you. Yeah, like you said, this is like it's been like one of the like biggest. So it's small in size is a problem compared to the bibliographic commons. And figure out something that works for Wikipedians and Wikipedia contributors that is compatible with their workflows is a really hard question. So my first question is like, has there been discussion in this group about not generating references from Wikidata, but starting with the decoration of existing citation templates with a QID. So, for example, extending whatever site news or site book template with a reference to the QID, it would be like a smoother entry point into a full-fledged replacement.
So that particular one didn't come up exactly, but there was a discussion of how to improve the interaction with the current SiteQ template, for instance. Kind of exposing it in the UI. If you're doing it as a visual editor or whatever. And then also there was a bit of a discussion around we don't want to make at least within our group, we didn't imagine it'd be a good idea to make a entity, a Q item for every single page of every single edition of every single book. So instead you would put the fine-grained information locally on the actual template, like which pages, which clauses, whatever, and then just cite the edition or work on Wikidata. So that came up, but not so much about changing the behavior of the existing template. That might be a little bit too far-reaching for a first step anyways. I think that's why it didn't come up as much.
In our littler group, we did have a brief discussion about using QIDs in citations, and decided that that's not really going to get us kind of the aggregation of data that we would want, and it leaves the data really distributed in a way that was less desirable. And if the page gets deleted or the source gets, it just seemed a little more fragile. So we had a brief discussion of it. I also had a group that had both Marielle and Stas in it. So there was a lot of burden of existing knowledge. Any questions?
Yeah, just in response to that, it was actually the first thing I talked about with Marielle on day one of the conference was, can we use the QIDs in Cytoid? And she said yes, and then she said, and the next thing we should do is get it into the CS1 template, which is the site news, site book, the standard master template. And we need to map it because the difficulty of getting a change to that template through is not in scope for this event. I mean, it's technically trivial, but it's one of the most watched, on the English Wikipedia, most watched, heavily controlled templates, and it would expose Wikidata something on the article pages of Wikipedia, which would probably scare people.
I would have suggested to do anything with English Wikipedia. So.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Well, that was an interesting discussion we had too about do we start with English Wikipedia or do we ignore it and just work with indie projects or Catalan.
Basque is using it.
So, time for another, one more
couple
big
of
question.
Any others for this track?
Nope. Okay, yeah, you got questions for this track, Wikipedia, citations.
On that theme as to whether we should single out English Wikipedia or not, I actually think we should encourage usage of other model systems because English Wikipedia is serving as the guinea pig by default for anything Wikimedia or research anyway in many cases. But for our purposes, that's not the most useful, and for the English Wikipedia, it may not be the most useful if we do these experiments there. And other communities are more interested in those kind of things. So the Basque are already using the same functionality that we're talking about. And if we go back to the beginnings of Wikidata, for instance, was the Hungarian Wikipedia that actually first allowed edits and that were related to Wikidata. And so just keep an open mind and make use of the diversity that we have in the community, and do not see us as blocked by the English Wikipedia, because it may not be the best model system for what you're doing.
Thank you. Anyone else before we move on to track 2? All right.
Oh, one more.
Oh, one more.
One more.
I guess I didn't really catch the last part of the action out of the group discussion, but my question is this direction the community is moving into in terms of making structured metadata for those citations? If it is, what are the, how long do you think that can be finished? How long does it take for existing ones?
What was the last qualifier there?
For existing,
Existing citations in the wiki family, right?
so existing citations are.
All projects? I mean, we sort of like looked at, 2 years out, 3 years out, 10 years out. I think everyone felt pretty confident. By 10 years out, yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's less than 10 years, pretty confident. Probably, I mean, I don't know. If you ask me, if we really get it going, maybe 2 or 3. I don't know. That's just a gut feel. I'm an optimist.
Awesome. Dream big, dream big.
Good note.
Okay, group 2.
We did create slides. We're group 2, so we try harder. Okay, we did a couple things. One was we went through the whole exercise of trying to figure out how to best incentivize Wikicite usage as, or Wikidata usage for structured bibliographic information. The other is that we, as facilitators, really tried to get the people to do all the dirty work. And so, we decided to do as a report out is to have members of the group report out the discussions as they happen throughout the day. So we're going to have different members of our group come up and just talk through some of the exercises we did and some of the outputs that we created.
Yeah, so John and Elizabeth did a lot of pulling teeth or something to get us to actually help make things. So the first part of the day was really kind of trying to figure out what scenario 2 meant. Because I think everybody came in saying, well, it's kind of like scenario 3 if you remove the constraints. It's definitely more than scenario 1. So there was a lot of discussion about, what was the actual scope and what was the meaning of corpus, for example. And what exactly was the role of Wikidata in it versus Federation and Wikibase and everything else. So we settled on well actually, I think John wrote this statement and then it got edited. But after much discussion, we have a statement that has various alternative interpretations depending on which words you use. But basically, this is what we think scenario 2 means and what it is. We want, or we're encouraging, or we're trying to make it so that institutions or communities or people can create or utilize and enrich Wikidata or maybe Wikibase installations of their own in order to curate and share the bibliographic information on their topical area or specialized area or their context or their location or their institution or whatever the parameters are that they're
confining to creative corpus. And the idea was here that we want to make it so that it's not just a handful of communities, but many, many communities of sizable contribution to these things. So I think that's where we left it.
So, and then from there, we talked about hopes and fears.
We each individually identified our hopes and fears for that description of the scenario, and then we clustered them into themes. And interestingly, the themes kind of were two ends of the same scale. Like, we are hopeful that this will scale to multiple communities, but we fear that it won't scale. Or we're hopeful that lots of specialists will engage, but we fear that we'll build something great and people just won't get it. We also asked ourselves, are any of the fears showstoppers, reasons to not do this at all? And that led to a discussion of the difference between a showstopper and a deal breaker, which was fun. But then this led to the next part of the day, which was thinking about the hopes and then envisioning what that would look like in 10 years if the hopes were realized.
So we asked ourselves a series of questions, placing ourselves in an imaginary future 10 years from now where this scenario has been fully realized. And we asked ourselves who's been using this curated bibliographic, these many curated bibliographic corpora on Wikidata, how they've been using it, what's easy for them, what's hard. And we split into groups for this, and a lot of our answers converged. Interestingly, some of the groups, when they talked about consumers, talked about students, researchers, journalists, application developers, professional societies, librarians, scientists. And when we talked about creators, we mostly talked about researchers, scientists, libraries, professional societies, publishers, et cetera, with some divergences. We also talked about bots a bit, both helpful, good bots who want to serve humanity and also dystopian evil robots. And many of our, what's easy questions were the same. All of our professional and personal hopes and dreams were fulfilled simultaneously. What was hard diverged a little more. Discovering new corpora in this distributed environment was identified as something that might be difficult for both humans and bots. Understanding the boundaries of those corpora was identified as an issue, and there were anxieties similar to the fears that Michelle articulated earlier about adoption curves and scale and understanding gaps. And we talked about what was valuable for all of these groups. Generally, it centered on better discovery, less duplication of research, suite visualizations, access to knowledge, and fewer silos in general for both the creators and the consumers of metadata. And for evil robots, there was profit.
So then we took this and put it out on a timeline.
Right, so this is the timeline we came up with, and so there's a pattern, a general pattern to this, but I thought it was interesting to see how the specifics differ depending on what rock we stand on and what color post-its we were using. So we were trying to map, if we're going to get to that bright future in 10 years, starting now, what are the steps? What do you do first? What's a sign of progress? In the early stages, what can we, what could possibly at the start, you're putting together reference, corpora, trying to get people some initial tooling so they can actually do some work and work with the environment. Some good signs of traction in the mid portion of this stretch is being able to visualize the entire corpus and look for gaps and fill them in, getting community-driven data creation and data quality metrics. And towards the end, other signs of success and maturity are that business interests start to come around demanding interoperability with this corpus for specialty data. And another indicator, a standard one I presume is a Nobel Prize is awarded for a discovery assisted by one of these wiki sites. And then you can also have other pattern, the first, the top group, the yellow post-its, shorten, they either did one of two things. They shortened the 10 years optimistically to 5 years, or they're forecasting a worldwide shortage of post-its 5 years out. And another group, the lime green, had three futures. One kind of real world, one ideal, and one dystopia.
From there, we worked on into actions.
It was the Nobel Prize that was considered, the ultimate paradigm of success. But there were also a number of ones on the tenure time where there were parties happening, celebrations. So just to recap, I learned a lot from this day because there was this beautiful narrative structure starting from 10:45 where we got together, we had a level set, right, and defined terms. What does corpora mean? What does the big graphic mean? What are the boundaries? And then we did, we tried to get a better understanding in a very general sense with the hopes and fears exercise. What it does is it fleshes out, well, these are some of the characteristics that we see, that we want, that we would see when this is getting realized. But then getting into the real world where there's actual users, fleshing out the concrete user stories, figuring out, well, user stories don't just happen overnight, right? They take time to develop. And so plotting that out on a 10-year time frame really forced us to begin to think through what are some of these intermediary steps along the way. And then, then there's the really difficult job of prioritizing, well, what should we tackle first amongst the year 1, year 2 stuff? That really leads us to, I guess the upshot of all of this, to get clarity on what types of activities can we do tomorrow? I mean, by that literally tomorrow, because I think our moderators wanted us to stop talking and get working. So tomorrow's hackathon is actually a list, an output that really captured the essence of what we've been building up the entirety of the day. We came up with 4 different ones, and of this set, I'll leave it as a surprise, which 2, oh shoot. It's a surprise! Which 2 will get pitched tomorrow. You can read the tea leaves, the writing in the sky, or just the graphic. But they roughly break down in the following way. So there's a lot of technical development that's needed, and that was very, very clear as we were looking through the 10-year time frame. Tooling needed for this, tooling needed for that, and it wasn't all needed up front, but there was quite a lot of different types of tools needed. Data ingestion, data quality control, data curation, data visualization, data creation, data export. Essentially, what we've done is we've said, we need to create a publishing pipeline. The thing is, with why build it from scratch is really the notion, the basis of all of this. So getting together, pulling together existing lists that cut across all the different types of tooling needs that we see now or expect that we will need, that's something that some people in the group felt were really important. Just to have that handy, because also listening to many of the talks over the past 2 days, there are a lot of tools that have been built, are being built. In the Q&A, some of the respondents from the audience have been suggesting, well, use this tool, whatever. There's a lot of different tools in our minds, pulling them all together. This is, I think, going to be very, very, very helpful in moving forward. The second one, number 4, actually, is related, somewhat related. We have an existing wiki database of citations. We need to grow it. How do we see this? So figuring out how to reach out to those organizations with large data sources, identifying them, and then coming up with a strategy for how to approach them and convince them to hand it over. We also focused on the area of outreach, right? Obviously, this is all getting built for users, right? And having documentation or a set of that makes up, that includes like reference examples, early success stories. All of these have been modeled very well by Outreach Wiki. So an effort that really sits down and has that handy so that anyone can go and access it and learn what is the value of this is really important. The last one is getting at early adoption groups, early users, training for them, right? So this, those of us who work on developing software, we know that we can build a perfect system, but unless we also anticipate the change management part where there is a ramp up, right, and a skill set training onboarding period. Getting that up front with the existing resources that are already in place, such as carpentries and so forth, inserting examples into those tutorials, into those modules,
getting that into the instructional curriculum of those particular programs and efforts. That's a really great way to leverage what already exists and not just create something out of the blue that would be harder to tap into. Those are our 4. Any last words?
Just that you can see that from here you will learn more about the 2 surprise ones. We strong-armed the members of the group to add them into the ideas pitch for tomorrow, and you'll be hearing more about those 2 tomorrow. And with that, you should clap. We
have a few minutes for some questions, so this may be 2 or 3 questions tops. Anyone? Okay.
Thank you so much. It sounds like such a great group to have been a part of. I'm like, oh, I love 3, but 2 have been great too.
It was a great group.
It seems like you did a really fantastic job of kind of marking out how you see the next 10 years from our current state to product. And so with that, one of the things though that I would love to hear about a little bit more is what sort of conversations did you have about the role of the Wikimedia movement, about the Wikimedia Foundation within the context of this work?
We were lucky enough to have quite a number of foundation staff in here providing their perspectives, and it was extremely helpful. I think in passing, there were quite a lot of comments about how these communities could be leveraged. We were also very interested in expanding upon that to the larger group, but absolutely, that's an area that already exists, power-based.
And a community is a thing to be leveraged?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Well, I think I think this also came up as sort of there's various different communities, and I think that was part of what we were talking about. One of the things we wanted to expand is people who are not really part of the community right now, as well as contributing who are experts in their areas and who have a deep interest in bibliographic data or whatever it is that would be wanting to kind of sponsor corpus. And so I think that was kind of our focus to some extent, is actually using the tools that the Wikimedia Foundation has, but reaching out to other groups to bring them in and have them doing this for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, our statement that we crafted was really about people doing projects or working in areas that they love and they're passionate about, and it wasn't about them working in Wikidata. So a lot of what we ended up doing was, like we were just saying, like this communities, like trying to find ways of bridging the communities that exist that care about just stuff, and then how do we have the tools and the ideas and the structures that we put in place to be of value to them, and so that it becomes natural that you would use Wikidata to build your corpus. So it was a lot. I mean, it ended up being a lot about tools, but then it was also just a lot about outreach and how you start to do change management. People who work naturally in these areas.
All the more because they're professionals who have thought quite a bit about this, and building off of their existing work, the tools that they have, the protocols, the workflows, the standards, and so forth, really seems like one of the targeted best bets to get it off the ground at scale.
Yeah, we could do one more quick question, if there is one. Okay, love the slides.
I think we should give group 2 an extra hand
Yeah.
with the slides.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ben and I are going to present group 3, which was Excel both in scope and in size. There were quite a few people upstairs in group 3.
Indeed, yeah. I'm so pleased and just impressed to see the report outs from the first 2 groups. We designed this kind of this workshop format. It's awesome to see how well you were able to put it to use and then what you were able to generate. And I think we're going to be kind of sifting through these findings for a while and really be studying them. So thank you for that great work. I think we found there were a lot of people drawn to our moonshot idea. We were in a very big room. There was some ebb and flow of people coming in and out. but a lot of really dedicated folks who stayed the whole time. But what we found right away, I think, was that the group was too large to kind of focus as quickly as we needed to get through that format. So we ended up breaking up into 2 groups and sort of doing a bit more of a gentle entry into these topics. Did some hopes and fears analysis in one of them, did a bit of like initial use case articulation in the other one. And when we broke for lunch, Phoebe and I kind of did a quick analysis of that and found a few clusters of topics that we then presented back to the group that assembled after lunch. And these became 3 subgroups that worked in the midsection of the day. And so there was one group that was focused on, we were still struggling with the right headers for these, but one on something called discoverability, which encompassed a lot of things, but was really trying to imagine what are the affordances that this universal corpus of bibliographic metadata of all potential source types, what does it afford to users of all kinds, very advanced specialized users, but also general users? What does it allow them to assess quickly and easily of the landscape of knowledge, to get a kind of a literature review or a kind of sense of the topical map of a literature and a language? And so there was a whole kind of sub-track that formed, thinking about those use cases and those user journeys. There was another sub-track that emerged around modeling and quality. So thinking about everything from what are all the different source types that would need to be modeled, and what are the questions that go into that, but also how do you create statements and data structures to record, to kind of monitor bias or quality of sources and also of citations themselves. So that was a deep topic that one group went with. And then the third group was looking at what we were calling interlinking or the decompression space, that was looking at, what is happening in Wikidata now with the Wikicite activity, and what it would look like to create like a third space that is more dedicated exclusively on the work of aggregating and reconciling source metadata from many different contributors, obviously including libraries, and we had a lot of librarians in our session, but from many conceivable sources, including sources that are not currently on the grid, as it were, of kind of bibliographic metadata world. So there was a kind of a diversity question and an inclusion question on that. So these were very generative discussions, covered a lot of ground, a lot of really interesting, some people kind of came in midstream and kind of energized these discussions. But what we found is that this moonshot idea is so massive, and like the moon itself, it can drive one a little mad. And so we found ourselves kind of, continuing to kind of generate and not necessarily focusing as much. But what it did produce was a really interesting list of potential projects, which we did not have time to refine, but we can go through now. And then what we'll end with some really, I think, important meta questions. Because each group sort of did a preliminary report out and said, okay, we covered some interesting ground, we started to converge on a few things, but there's some really big questions this raised that we would need to talk about further. And so some of those led to some project ideas, and some of them just led to a kind of a taking account of, what are these big things we need to tackle? Some of them were technical, some of them were policy. So we will go through this at the end, but right now, Phoebe's going to kind of give a quick run through of the variety and flavor of some project ideas that were kind of thrown out in this kind of rich, generative, but somewhat overstuffed session.
So 2 things. Group 2 may have killed the Post-it supply for Greater Berkeley, but we killed the easel supply for Greater Berkeley because we went through a lot of Post-it notes, big Post-its. So the other thing you may be asking yourself at this point is, Ben and Phoebe, what is the scope of Scenario 3? And that is a good question. That's a good question. Because we discovered at the end, although we are doing a moonshot very clearly, we didn't actually pick which planet's moon we're going to. But the idea is that we have collected all or a large amount of citation bibliographic metadata. Here are some project ideas. Some of these might be pitched tomorrow. They might not be. Create an open Twitter for annotation. A universal citation database for a citable work. Is it complete? Nobody knows. Will it put commercial indexes out of business? We hope so. Maybe a Wikipedia tool that can give you related information based on an analysis of the citations at the end. What about assessment of sources? How about medical sources? Can we figure out statements made about those sources? Provide some paratextual information. we need to collect questions about our technology, and we need to collect questions for our technical group and from our technical group. This needs to be a project tomorrow. What's possible? What do we need to know on both sides? Similarly, we have a project about figuring out requirements for federated bibliographic data. Like, what do we need to make it work? What properties need to be shared? We need to provide guidance for people who want to make federated workflows, federated projects. We need to worry about vandalism. That's a project. We need to analyze the citations that are already there, building off group one. Someone proposed a cytometer. But at the same time, we need to combat bias. So I will say, working on bias and issues of quality and not restricting ourselves to notions of current quality that it might be either biased or simply inaccurate because they don't take into account all of the types of sources and perspectives in the world was a big theme of many of our discussions. And lastly, we talked a lot about how when we talk about massive interoperability of databases, the jargon is really hard. Like the jargon of talking about federated Wikibases that have these different properties is very difficult to understand even for ourselves. So we need to de-jargonify these projects, and there's a very interesting project proposed to visualize this concept, right, that we are all working on collectively here now at this conference. What is Wikicite? We can make information about this much more accessible for a bigger audience. This is a little post-meeting project about URIs. Imagine how we cite items with URIs. There are also a couple projects not on the sheet out of our groups, and group members should feel free to fill in. I don't think I can do it without the notes, so group members should feel free to fill in additional projects at the end here. I would say we have so many projects because there's so many angles, right? There's so many parts of this elephant that we're all trying to get at and trying to understand. And because there are so many parts, I think a productive discussion is working on requirements for certain pieces. But when we think about that, there's a couple of meta problems I think we should all keep in mind for everything we do here. One is we are speaking in English, and we are writing in English, and we are referring to policy discussions that are in English, and we are writing labels in English, and most of the world doesn't speak English. So that's problem number one. And how do we solve that systematically? How do we solve that with the actual project? I'm not saying how do we translate this discussion for other librarians and data modelers in other countries. I'm saying how do we systematically make the project accessible to the whole world? And how do we represent the world's bibliographic data? So that's meta problem number one. Meta problem number two is that particularly for scenario 3, we are up against technical limitations. We actually don't know if we can do it with the current database. And by it, I mean put hundreds of millions of items of citation metadata into Wikidata or a Wikibase, a federated Wikibase. There's real technical limits about the size of the database, the speed of the database, what gets called, how much information you need to call from other places. There's people in this room who understand these limits. I am not one of them. But what I do understand is that we need to figure out our requirements as a community for what kinds of data pass-through we would like to see, what kinds of properties need to be shared. So our meta suggestions to solve the meta problems are, one, figure out our technical requirements, which involves asking questions for and from the tech team. Also, figuring out what does federation exactly mean, because this is big talk, but what does it mean in the context of using a federated database to, for instance, cite an item on a wiki article? Like, what gets called from where in order to do that? So what does federation mean? And perhaps there's a suggestion to make multiple communities. What other linguistic suggestions, I think, are?
Right. I mean, yeah, in spite of what is the incredible inherent multilingual capability of Wikidata, where this work has been happening, there was this question raised of whether we need to look at these, and a multi-community scenario where then by language, that there are pros and cons to this approach, but it was something that got raised both in terms of bringing the kind of focus to kind of the multi-pronged work that this is, and kind of reckoning with the fact that those are kind of very real. There are very real cultural and linguistic boundaries around these different kind of bodies of knowledge that are being trying to be collected.
So I think in recognition that we had a very large group with a very large number of participants, we should take Q&A but not answer the questions.
Right, and also I just wanted to say too, building on that, we tried to kind of summarize quickly, but folks in the room who were with us for day 3, all of it, part of it, what have you, is there anything else you'd like to add? Kind of add to that, counter that, anything we did not cover there?
Well, with group 2, we had people do it from the beginning and had them come up and share. So
I just wanted to reiterate that group 2 was really awesome.
But I just want to say group 3 was the biggest. Right,
group 1 was the
questions
first.
Can you elaborate on the open Twitter for annotations? Sounds intriguing.
I think that's best followed up on with afterwards and with Matt, whose idea it was. But it's a fascinating idea.
I'm really concerned about like how do we take this to the larger world, and not just the traditional where like most of the wiki activities are also happening. So during the talk in the morning, it was said that earlier catalogs were like this, like the traditional catalogs, but we should remember that there are libraries in India which use that even now. So we have to think about how do we get all that data, how do we help them achieve, to get everything digitized and stuff. So just that.
Thanks for that comment. Super important.
Absolutely.
Other questions for, well, for anybody, frankly, for any of the groups, but for us. Comments?
And just for comment, I think a part of to me is the most fascinating is the scalability and technical constraints. There are plenty of other questions of like building communities and outreach, like you all said. These are like big fundamental problems. But the one that I think like we can have like a shared assessment without consulting the entire planet is basically what are the scalability requirements and what are the technical limitations for this project. So I think it would be super helpful to expand on the ideas we had at Wikimedia to find data sources to sort of quantify the size of the different domain areas that are represented here, and maybe hear more about like what would it mean from a technical perspective if you wanted to store, say, billions of entities. What would that mean? We need to rewrite Wikibase from scratch, use a different data store. I guess these are questions that
I think that somehow that escaped documentation, but that actually was an idea that was raised. Was like there needs to be some baseline research done and to just try at least to approximate what is the magnitude that we would be trying hypothetically to aggregate in this sort of moonshot scenario.
Yeah, for sure. That seems like a project.
I think we can do one more and then we should wrap up. We're at time.
I have a question. Oh, so in the basically the group 2, we actually talked about insufficient resource, and now we're talking about 3 scenarios. So I'm just wondering, from a community's perspective, out of those 3 scenarios, do you think it makes sense to embark on all of them, or concentrate on the limited resource, get one done, and then really truly using it to demonstrate the benefit, and then you can create more adoption or buy-in?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great just
question, open question to put out and for us all to discuss
over beers and food tonight. But I think this is a question. It's not that these are three concurrent paths. They obviously very interwoven, and they may kind of sequentially kind of bear out too. So I think this is something we should all discuss. And what is the best way? There was some discussion in our group too about if you aim for the moon, you're going to miss. So let's start. Where do we start building? Do you have one more?
Yeah. I was actually going from group to group, which was an interesting perspective as well. In the first group, I was charged to take a look at diversity of the people who are actually commenting and make sure that the voices that haven't been heard get another chance. And I would like to extend that here. There are a number of people who haven't stood in front of us, who haven't contributed in the same way, and I would just like to encourage you to think about how you can make your voice heard or make your words seen or something like this. If you need help with that, come to speak to someone of us, because we really want to make use of your perspectives, of your expertise, of your use cases, of your knowledge in whatever we're doing next. We are biased by nature, by the way we have organized this thing, also by being in this country which doesn't let everyone in and things like that. But we want to really profit from the fact that you who are in the room are actually here. And so if you haven't spoken to the microphone or in any way that you think you would like, then please do. There's one more day to do it.
Excellent note to end on. Yeah. And so I just want to check, is there other housekeeping announcements that we need to make? I think you all know the venue. It's in the general information on the conference page. I think I did. Is this the opening deck or is this the? Oh, no, it's just the back row. Are there any other announcements?
I don't think so. So as a recap, we've been talking a lot today, so I think it's enough time to go for drinks and some food. The venue, the social venue is just a 7-minute walk from here.
Yeah, if you go out the front door here, you turn left, you come to Shattuck, you turn left, and you'll see it in 3 blocks. It's very easy. It's called Cornerstone. It's next to the Pegasus bookstore.
And I would say we have an official start there at 7. What that means is that you can still use a venue here for informal discussions, for chilling out. I know there are some groups that want to talk now, so. Okay. So you can use the space as you see fit in the next, let's say, 45 minutes, but it's important that we leave like 7 at the latest, and so we make sure that there's really like 10 to 7, everybody's out, and we can close the venue here and welcome you all at Cornerstone. So bring your tickets. This is mostly for us to have a sense of like who's coming and what the total number of people is. And with that, I don't think there's any other final.
Yeah, so tomorrow we'll be coming back here for day 3, which, as I said at the beginning and I put in the email, we're going to be doing a round of idea pitches. So got a little preview of 2 idea pitches that will be coming from group 2. But there will be additional idea pitches coming from the community and from you, and they can come from brainstorming that you've done, ideas that you've been talking about here. It's a great way for everybody's voice to be heard, different ideas to be shared, and for us to work on stuff tomorrow. Tomorrow is a do-a-thon. It's about doing work. It's not all technical. It's also about coming up with outreach ideas, building the community ideas, actually working together to make something happen. And so if you haven't already, make sure you get into the system and write down your idea pitches. The group 2 pride is very strong. Excellent. I appreciate it. I was asked to make one other announcement, and this may be a little inside baseball for some in the audience, but is anyone, raise your hand if you are part of one of the Wikimedia Movement Strategy working groups. I'm in group 2. It was brought to our attention. There are actually a number of folks here who are in these working groups, and it's a very distributed process feeding this strategic planning effort. And it was suggested that there be a lunch meetup tomorrow of these folks. So while we have the podium, I was asked by Pavan Santosh to make an announcement about that. And if you have further questions or want to kind of raise ideas for that lunch meetup,
go to Pava and or me or anyone. But so if you're in that category, let's meet up tomorrow at lunch.
Also, we have a Wikisource meetup right after the session. Outside in the lobby will be, so anyone interested in Wikisource and Wikidata.
There's a Wikisource meetup in the lobby after this right now. That's what we said. And with that, we clap.
Rob, you gotta go back to the hotel or are you gonna just stick around? I don't know. I don't know whether we should talk to Diane about this idea. That makes sense. Can you find Diane? Oh, there. I think whether Rick Rose, I don't want to bother her with it yet because we're more for DC local folks. So more us.
Do you have a minute?
I did. We can meet you out that way. Yeah.
Okay.
After I stop all this stuff.